deal with the United States. It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight.
When China entered the World Trade Organization, everybody told us how wonderful it was going to be because we're going to get all these cheap goods and everybody's welfare was going to be so much better. You know, if you go back and look at the 8 years of President Bush and the 8 years of President Obama, do you know that over those 16 years that the typical family only made $80 cumulatively? So their increase in welfare was $5.50 a year about over the 15 years after China entered the WTO. So there was no gain in real income because while we were getting the cheap goods, we were losing jobs, destroying cities, destroying towns, and so on.
Trump has hit back. He announced another 50% potential tariff on China, and that would mean the total tariff from China would be over 100%. Basically, if that goes in effect, there will be no trade between two countries. That's why in response to Trump's tariffs, China has banned 7 rare earth minerals to United States, and they're likely selling US treasuries to put more pressure on American bonds. On top of all this, China said today that it's ready to fight till the end if US goes ahead with Trump's tariff. What does that mean? No one knows, but clearly it was a hectic day. So let's go over exactly what happened, starting with Trump's announcement.
Breaking news to bring you now. Donald Trump says the United States is poised to slap an additional 50% tariff on China. This is posting on his Truth Social account. Let's show you what he's had to say. It's a long post, but yesterday he notes that China issued the retaliatory tariffs of 34% on top of their already record-setting tariffs, he says, going on to say, therefore, if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50%, effective from April the 9th. Additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. Negotiations with other countries, which have also requested meetings, will begin taking place immediately. That is Donald Trump saying that he is poised to launch additional 50% tariffs on China if it does not withdraw its 34% increase, which was in response to the United States' additional 34% increase, which was following the initial 20%. If you can keep up with the maths, good on you. But that is the state of play facing the markets, China, and the rest of the world.
Alright, so all the numbers are likely getting confusing, so let me simplify it. When Trump took office, he announced 2 10% tariffs in China for their role in the fentanyl trade that's happening in the United States. So 10% we had in February, then 10% we had in March. That's 20% total. Then when Trump announced reciprocal tariff on every country, he put a 34% on China. That would mean total the Chinese tariffs are roughly 54% as of right now. But we also have to remember tariffs from Trump's first term and Biden's term. They vary product to product, and they're also not as broad as tariffs we have had in this term. But those tariffs roughly equal anywhere from 7.5% to 20% depending on the product. Just for simplicity, let's just count it as 7.5%. So far we have around 60% tariff on Chinese goods. Now when Trump announced his 34% tariff, China retaliated and they announced another 34% tariff and bunch of other stuff. We'll talk about other stuff in just a second, but for now, tariff is the only thing that matters. Now, Trump was not happy with China's retaliation, so yesterday, as you guys just saw, he put out a warning. If China doesn't take off those tariffs by April 8th, so today, he will slap on another 50% on all Chinese goods. That would mean that the total Chinese tariff would be over 110%. Now, hopefully that all makes sense, but we are still not done. You see, Trump also put a secondary tariff on Venezuela because of all the human rights violation that the Venezuelan government is carrying out on top of rigging the election and stuff like that. Trump said that any country that's supporting Venezuela by buying Venezuelan oil, Trump will slap on another 25% tariff on that country. So whoever is buying Venezuelan oil, guess who's buying that oil? China. So now we don't know for sure if China has this tariff or not, but we do know that Trump has announced any country that buys Venezuelan oil will get another 25% tariff slapped on there. So it's highly likely that China will get this tariff at some point. Clearly, these tariffs are going to be devastating for the Chinese economy, and here we have Trump at the presser yesterday explaining why he has to do this.
As you know, against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. And I said, if that tariff isn't removed by tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we're putting a 50% tariff on above the tariffs that we put on. So they've gone for years. They've become a rich country because of people, again, that were in the White House that allowed this to happen. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year they'd make on us on trade, and it shouldn't be that way. And I have a great relationship with President Xi. I hope it's going to stay that way. I have great respect for China, but they can't do this with just, we're going to have one shot at this, and no other president's going to do this, what I'm doing. And I'll tell you what, it's an honor to do it because we have been just destroyed, what they've done to our system. You know, we have $36 trillion of debt for a reason. And the reason is that people allowed it to get that way. So we'll be talking to China. We'll be talking to a lot of different countries. And I think, you know, if we can make a really fair deal and a good deal for the United States, not a good deal for others. This is America first. It's now America first. And we didn't put America first. We put America last. The people that were in the Oval Office put America last.
Now, for anyone who hates numbers, I apologize one more time, but we need to talk numbers again. This time, let's talk about how much trade these two countries actually do. You see, we export roughly $150 billion worth of goods to China, and that's the amount that China is tariffing. So the 34% tariff that China announced applies to this $150 billion of goods. But on the other hand, China exports roughly $450 billion worth of goods to the United States. And that 54% tariff that we have on right now, and a possible 104% tariff that we might put on, applies to the whole $450 billion worth of goods that China exports. You see, clearly, we have a lot more Chinese goods that we can tariff than China has American goods that they can tariff. This is exactly why we've been saying on this channel for God knows how long that China is more dependent on the United States than the US is on China. This is something Secretary of Treasury just confirmed in his most recent interview too. Watch it yourself.
Look at the history. We are the debtor nation.
Yes.
We have the trade deficits. The surplus nation is in the weaker position because the Chinese business model, and Tucker, by the way, the Chinese business model and the economy are the most unbalanced, imbalanced in the history of the modern world. We've never seen anything like this in terms of their export level relative to their GDP, relative to their population. So I think it is going to be very difficult for them to try to change the model. They're in a deflationary recession/depression right now. They're trying to export their way out of it, and we can't let them do that. But I think that, you know, when you think the Chinese manufacturing system is like that old Disney movie with the brooms carrying the buckets.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. Like, that's their business model.
You see, this is exactly why China is going one step ahead to put more pressure on the United States. China has also imposed export controls on rare earth minerals, threatening US tech and defense supply chain. These are the 7 minerals that China is restricting. When I say restricting, they're basically banning it. The law now says that any country that wants to export this out of China needs to get permission from the CCP. And CCP is just not going to give permission to any US companies. So here are the 7 minerals: samarium, godalium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandinavium, and yttrium. Now, these names sound like magic potions, but they're in fact very important to the modern supply chain. And here's why these minerals are so important.
But if you're building an electric vehicle and you need a way to keep your neodymium magnets from weakening under extreme temperatures, you are heat-proofing with dysprosium. If US Marines are carrying out a nighttime raid and those soldiers need night vision goggles, you're converting infrared light into something visible. This latest move adds to a growing list of rare earths China has either restricted or actually banned the export of to the United States. And experts say China has tailored this list of raw materials to exactly what the US needs. Some American aerospace manufacturers, for example, build avionics using materials that are sole sourced from China.
Now here I have an interesting hot take. This is a good thing. Let me explain why I'm saying that. First of all, you see how everyone calls these rare earth minerals? Well, they're not exactly rare. When they were discovered, they were rare, and the name just stuck. You see, you and I can just go dig up a pound of dirt and figure out how to make these rare earth minerals. At least some of them. But the problem is, you need a very intensive purifying process that produces a lot of toxic waste. And this toxic waste is exactly why China has a near monopoly on processing all the rare earths in the world. In fact, they control 90% of the processing market for the rare earths. You see, almost every developed country around the world, including the United States, they have strict laws, environmental laws governing how you can process a rare earth and how to take care of the toxic waste. Because of all these regulations, it's very expensive to do that here. But in China, they don't have as many regulations compared to the Western countries, and that's exactly why so much of the rare earth processing has slowly moved into China. Companies are willing to do that there because it's just cheaper because of less regulation. So yes, China has a monopoly on rare earth, at least for now. But it's not the kind of monopoly that cannot just go away. You see, more CCP uses this monopoly as a leverage in negotiations or to put pressure on other countries. The more and more other countries will step up to the plate because there will be demand for rare earths and they are willing to process that if the price is right. Slowly, more and more countries will start processing rare earths. And it will be a good news because then China will not have as strong of a monopoly as it has now. And that's gonna start happening, especially now that China is restricting the biggest market in the world from accessing these rare earths. On top of this, we already have a stockpile of the rare earths, so that's probably gonna last us for a good while other markets slowly step up their production and their processing. So we can just buy these from other countries. Of course, that doesn't mean it's not gonna hurt in the short term, but wouldn't you rather have this problem right now when we are not in a war with China than have it when we are in a war with China and have the need for the rare earths immediately? In fact, CCP using rare earth as a negotiating tool is the exact reason why we need to be less dependent on China for our critical supply chains. Now, for China, it's much harder to find new buyers than it is for United States to just find new sellers. You see, China has factories all built up to supply to the US market. And if US stops buying from China, where is China going to sell a lot of this product? After all, US is the biggest market. It's not easy to replace United States, and that's the exact leverage that we are using right now. Here we have the White House economic advisor, Stephen Miron, explaining this point.
Right? Now, when you think about this with tariffs, you say, okay, who's flexible and who's inflexible? We can reallocate our demand across borders. Factories that are already built cannot move. They are stuck where they are. China has developed factories for selling to the US consumer market. They've trained workers for selling to the US consumer market. We can move our demand across borders. Those factories and citizens cannot move. They're stuck where they are. And so the incidence will fall on them, just as in the property tax example, right? Now, does this automatically happen on day one? No, but will this happen in the fullness of time? Absolutely. This is just the basic economics of incidence in public finance. And if the incidence is falling on other countries because they're inflexible, the Chinese now have to find someplace else to absorb their demand, to absorb their excess supply. And guess what? There isn't anywhere else to absorb their excess supply. Who's going to buy as much as American consumers? Nobody, right? There is no place else to absorb their excess supply.
Along with all the retaliation, China also made some statements. Pretty strong statements. More specifically, China's Commerce Ministry said this. China says that it will fight to the end if America insists on new tariffs. Now, I don't exactly know what they mean by the end. Hopefully they mean the end of the CCP, and let's hope that's true. But they also went on to say, if the US side is bent on having its own way, China's side will follow it to the end. When in reality, this is all just bluffing. And this is something CCP has done before too. You guys remember Trump's first term when he started placing all the tariffs on China? They did something exactly like this. When Trump placed his first wave of tariffs, China said they'll fight till the end, and they slapped their own tariffs on US goods. In reality, this was just China and CCP testing the US resolve. They wanted to see if US is actually up for a fight or they just gonna fold as soon as China punches back. And Trump just doubled down on the tariff, and then China was ready to negotiate. Same thing China is doing again. They are fighting back to the initial wave of the tariff, but as Trump keeps doubling down, I'm sure they'll come to the negotiating table because at the end of the day, China will hurt more if there is a tariff war. Now, this is not me just speculating it, because I was just in high school when Trump won his first presidency. But this is something that the person who negotiated with the Chinese delegation in Trump's first term, he is sharing that. Listen to it yourself.
There's history here, right, Gordon? 2018, 2019, we saw how it all unfolded then. And I think back to a conversation that I had in December, leading into the administration with Cleet Willems. He was one of the top negotiators for the U.S. team in the first go-around, and he basically said to me that at first blush, the first $50 billion, China did not move. I want to play part of that interview for you, get your reaction on the other side.
When the U.S. first took the $50 billion action against China, the first set of tariffs, China basically told us to take a hike.
Okay.
They didn't engage. They didn't take it seriously.
It was nothing to them.
Correct.
Okay.
But as he continued to ramp it up, all of a sudden they came to the table and they wanted to deal.
So 50 billion, take a hike, which is kind of where we are now with the 34% on roughly $150 billion in imports. You think she's boxed in? How does he respond then? What's coming?
Well, in 2018, China picked up somewhere between 75 to 81% of the cost of President Trump's Section 301 tariffs. And so far, we're seeing China make moves to pick up the cost of this new round of tariffs. They're starting to weaken their currency, and also they're increasing subsidies to exporters to the U.S. So I think Xi Jinping's going to try and do that for as long as he can. But this time, he doesn't have as much money. So I'm not so sure that he can hold out for as long as he did in 2018.
There were some talking about the Chinese currency. There does seem to be a fall. Now, there are many ways to read this, and I'm not a currency trader or even a currency expert, so I don't know exactly what is going on. But there seems to be a fall in the value of Chinese yuan. Now, China did something pretty similar back in 2018 when the Chinese economy got hit with a 20% tariff. They basically devalued their currency by 20%, which in effect kind of canceled out the tariff, and the Chinese producers, Chinese sellers were unaffected. Now, that will be hard to do for CCP right now, because if the tariffs do go up to 100%, CCP would have to devalue the yuan insane, and that would likely cause many other problems that CCP is not well equipped to deal with right now. Now, US Treasury yield was also going up yesterday, and that could mean a lot of things, but many people have speculated that it was the Chinese who were selling their bonds. They do own a good amount of US Treasuries, and they were selling those to push up the yields to put more pressure on President Trump and the US Treasury. Now, another important thing President Trump did say in his statement was that if China doesn't roll back their 34% retaliatory tariff, there will be no talks between the US delegation and Chinese delegations to figure out a trade deal. That means that all the other countries are pretty much talking with the United States to take away these reciprocity tariffs, but China won't be doing so. In fact, Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent confirmed today that more than 70 countries have reached out to the United States to figure out a deal, and Japan is likely going to be one of the first ones to negotiate a final trade deal. President Trump also confirmed this at today's press conference. Here's that clip.
And I will say this, virtually every country wants to negotiate. If I didn't do what I did over the last couple of weeks, you wouldn't have anybody wants to negotiate. We would have gone to these countries who want to talk, and they were, well, we don't want to talk. Now they're coming to us. They're offering things like even Bibi, and this is unrelated because it's a different kind of a relationship, but he started off our conversation today that he's cutting all of the tariffs, he's cutting everything, he's going to get down to a free base, he's going to do things that, in all fairness, other countries, if they said that, would have never even thought about doing it. Now they're offering things to us that we would have never even thought of asking them for, because they're experiencing a lot of hurt. And the hurt is that they've taken advantage of us and we finally fought back. Tariffs will make this country very rich. We're rich anyway, but we're rich in a certain way. We have $36 trillion in debt. I want to get rid of it, and we can do it quickly with proper deals. So when countries don't allow us to sell our product, but we allow them to sell their product, when they charge us massive amounts of money for the privilege of going into their country, those days are over.
YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators right now. That's why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel. But if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel or a faceless channel, now is the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every single day, and it's pushing newer and smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure you have many questions on how to start and grow a channel. I get these questions in my email all the time from some of you guys. That's why we have decided to put all our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for completely free. So if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on your screen. This bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it is limited to 100 people at a time. So be sure to sign up before it gets full.